chat here as I was scrolling through Twitter and Instagram and looking at all the atrocities that the settler colonial apartheid regime of Israel continues to commit against the Palestinian people in their liberation struggle against that settler colonial apartheid regime. And I was watched some more of the interview Danny Haifong did with Ali Abu Nima. So I think before I had used his last name as Abu Mina, but it's Abu Nima. Anyways, and one of the questions that Danny asked him towards the end of the interview, I recommend checking it out, was, what are the what is the perspective of what is your thoughts around these different people in the West, different politicians, and their response to the Palestinian resistance to the apartheid regime and all of those gains they were able to make taking their land back on October 7th. And Ali's response was, well, it doesn't really matter what people in the West think, whether it's Bernie or Cornel West or Biden or Blinken, whoever, that doesn't really matter. It's never really been helped out the Palestinian cause, like thoughts and prayers or better analysis or perspective from people in the West. That hasn't really changed the material conditions on the ground for them at all. So it doesn't really matter, right, what the perspective is from the West regarding the Palestinian resistance and the different forms that take, whether it be peaceful or otherwise. And they have every right to defend themselves using whatever means they have, as a occupied people who have been ethnically cleansed from their land, going back to 1948, 75 years ago, and then the 2 million people in Gaza. A lot of people refer to it as the world's largest open air prison, but I heard somebody push back on that, like, no, it's a concentration camp, right? So like, just try to put yourself in that perspective. Like, this Israel is just targeting apartment buildings, blowing them to smithereens with these just carpet bombing civilian infrastructure, killing so many people indiscriminately. But if you turn on the corporate media, that's the only, you're not going to see that. You're going to, like, oh well, they got Hamas launched a rocket. You're going to get that perspective. You're not going to get any type of historical context or analysis of the situation. Obviously that's by design, because these corporate media companies support the U.S. empire. They support the apartheid settler colonial regime of Israel, and this war is obviously good. This continued escalation and is good for the weapons contractors, the Boeings, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons of the world. So it just, yeah, I mean, think about it again. If you were put in that situation in a concentration camp, where I was watching the Gray Zone live stream earlier, back when Anya Parenpa went there in 2018, talked to this woman. Her husband had recently died, and his cancer had came back, and the apartheid regime would not let him leave Gaza to seek medical treatment. And that's just one example that happens. That happens a lot. I mean, think about that. Not letting them leave to seek cancer treatment. And then now they're cutting off water and electricity and food, and over half of the population in Gaza, 2 million people there, almost half are children, I believe, half under the age of 14. And, not having access to the basic necessities of life, indiscriminate bombing, imprisonment, limiting the amount of food. If you lived in those conditions, you would, be radicalized. You would want to resist in whatever way possible, having friends and family killed, dismembered, people losing their limbs. Like, you would be absolutely livid. You would want to strike back in whatever way possible to resist that occupation, to resist that settler colonial regime. So not so the only correct moral thing to do is to just have solidarity with the Palestinian people and support them in whatever we can. Different, organizations reporting or doing humanitarian work on the ground definitely need to be supported. I need to do some research on finding someone's to, support and try to help out a little bit financially. So it's always the moral thing to do, obviously, stand on the side of the oppressed against the oppressor. If you can't figure out who that is in this situation, you got some problems, right? Because it's night and day. It's very, very clear. Anyways, I don't know. Probably the title of this. It's probably, who knows, getting censored a little bit in the outlook. And just put it really simply, like 75 years ago, Palestine existed for the Palestinian people, and then the Western powers came in, ethnically cleansed it, took Palestinians off of their land, removed them from their homes and their land, and then created the state of Israel. Just put yourself in that situation. You're in your home, on your land, and somebody comes in. No, this is mine now. I'm kicking you out of here. I'm taking your house. I'm taking your land. It's mine now. That is how the state of Israel was created. It's a settler colonial state. It's a apartheid regime in every sense of the word. If I guess I was a little kid during the, once the apartheid regime of, South Africa ended, but you'd probably hopefully be on the right side of history, standing with the oppressed during that time. You should be standing with the Palestinian people during this time, during their liberation struggle against the apartheid regime. So I don't know. It seems pretty cut and dry, obviously, but if you're getting your news and analysis from corporate media, CNN, Fox, ABC, etc., they paint it completely differently. It's all about, the Palestinians, Hamas. They are the oppressors in this situation, and not the apartheid regime of Israel, who gets $4 billion a year in military aid from the United States, while the the various resistance groups, and it also needs to be pointed out that Hamas was elected, but they're just one one of many factions that are part of this resistance effort. And there's many, right? Again, like I mentioned earlier, if you were locked in a concentration camp, Max Blumenthal during the gray zone, I don't know why that was so hard to say, gray zone stream yesterday was talking about how Gaza is perhaps the most surveilled place on earth. Just horrible standards of living, very high suicide rates because the material conditions there are so horrible. Again, it's a literal concentration camp, and now Israel is just once again indiscriminately bombing civilian infrastructure, and there's so many just heartbreaking, just really gut-wrenching photos and videos of parents pulling their dead children out of the rubble because it was just bombed by with an Israeli airstrike, right? And again, a huge reason why the Israeli apartheid regime is able to exist and perpetrate these war crimes and atrocities on a daily basis is because the unconditional support the U.S. empire gives to that country. The U.S. just sent another fleet of military aircraft to that area to shore up support for their ally in the region. And I believe at some point, this is paraphrasing, but Joe Biden said if we didn't have, an Israel in the Middle East, we would have to create one to protect the interest of the United States, kind of it being its, watchdog or lapdog in the region. Yeah, so it's a very sad and tragic situation, right? But violence, as MLK said, rioting or violence is the language of the unheard. And I think it was Frantz Fanon who said, the oppressor determines the form of the struggle, and the oppressor obviously being the apartheid regime of Israel. Their form of struggle that they've picked is violence, ethnic cleansing, jailing of children, rape, torture, literally locking little kids up in cages. There was a thing on, I think it was Twitter, somebody was trying to say, look at what look at what Hamas is doing, locking these children in cages. Turns out it was 5 years ago, is the Israeli security services, the IDF, that was actually doing that. And there's all these reports of atrocities that the Palestinians have perpetrated without any type of evidence or support of that, and yet there's many too many to count or comprehend of the Israeli regime perpetrating just horrible things. Again, just so many just sad and tragic videos of Palestinian parents carrying their dead children in their arms out of the rubble of what used to be, their homes. I think it was one airstrike. It was like a family of 19 died in that airstrike. And again, the Israeli government, Netanyahu, the prime minister, was posting, literal war crime footage of the Israeli, Air Force or military conducting this indiscriminate carpet bombing of, apartment buildings in Gaza. And then the Israeli defense minister or somebody like that was talking about, calling the Palestinians like less than human, calling them animals. This is how they are viewed. So again, if you have any type of empathy, you obviously stand with the Palestinians against the oppressors, against the apartheid regime, and against the U.S. government and the politicians who run cover for all of these atrocities that are committed by the state of Israel, a lot of them, using U.S. weaponry. Again, they get $4 billion a year in U.S. military aid. So they wouldn't be able to do this if the U.S. wasn't unconditionally supporting them through all these, atrocities that they've been committing against the Palestinians for 75 years at this point. And then there's been hand wringing, the Hamas and the resistance, they're getting support from Iran. They shouldn't be doing that. Well, as Ali Abu Nima pointed out during his interview he had with Danny Haifong a couple days ago, it's like, well, there's not a whole lot of other countries who are willing to support the Palestinian resistance, so why would they not get material support from Iran in their liberation struggle, and they're trying to, take their land back and decolonize in real time? Of course they're going to take support from Iran. That would be completely ridiculous and counterproductive to not get some support for them. And then there's even, I made a video about it, like Cornel West trying to two sides it. Well, there's, violence is bad on both sides, whether it's, Israel and all the violence they've committed, or Hamas and these different groups. It's like, no, Cornell, you were close. You were very close here. There's no equivocating the violence of the oppressor, obviously the Israeli settler colonial state, and the violence of the oppressed, the Palestinian people in their liberation struggle. You can't equate that. It's just not, doesn't make any type of sense. As the oppressed, as the colonized, the Palestinian people have every right, morally and legally under international law, to resist the occupation by whatever means they're able to. And again, if you're paying attention at all, it's not the resistance, the Palestinian resistance, who targets civilian infrastructure. It's the Israeli apartheid regime who does that. And we've seen that time and time again over the last couple of days. And then we've seen that throughout the decades, the Israeli government attacking and targeting civilians. And then people say, well, why couldn't they just do it? That's my kitty trying to get on the couch. Why couldn't they just do it peacefully? Why do they have to resort to violence? Were you paying attention during 2018, during the Great March of Return? Peaceful. People marching for change to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinians. Peacefully. Say it again. Peacefully. And they were gunned down indiscriminately by Israeli sniper fire. Okay? So they could do it peacefully. They've tried that. Some would probably, say they've tried that too long. So what else do they have left when they're, Gaza, concentration camp with 2 million people, half of them children. Israel was once again bombing them indiscriminately, cutting off food, electricity, and water. So what do? You resist. If anybody is being keeping it real with themselves, they would be doing the exact same thing. You would have such righteous indignation and anger and rage and sadness, and you would probably channel that into finding ways to resist the colonizers and the oppressing forces in whatever way you could, right? I mean, I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it's quite analogous. Obviously, it's not really analogous at all, but mainstream liberals are always, or conservatives talk about the American Revolution and how, um, the people and the colonists. So I mean, they weren't good people to begin with. Obviously, colonists, stood up against the oppression of the British, and obviously the oppression the Palestinians people literally being in Gaza, being placed in a concentration camp, a whole lot worse than what the colonists were going through, because their gripe was taxation without representation, and they, um, obviously more to it than that. Gerald Horne's book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, he talked about how, well, one of the reasons that the, colonists revolted in the U.S. was they wanted to keep expanding slavery and keep that going longer, and they thought that the British Empire was going to kind of curtail that and get rid of that sooner than later. But anyways, we're taught in school, here in the U.S., and then fed this propaganda by the corporate media that the colonists in the U.S. Stood up for their rights and fought against the oppressive British Empire, and then during the American Revolution. Okay, well, why would you not extend that same logic to the Palestinian people in their liberation struggle, when what they are going through is exponentially worse than what the colonists' gripe was about taxation without representation? Okay? I mean, for God's sakes, again, like I mentioned, that when Anya Parenpo was in Gaza in 2018, she interviewed this lady. Her husband had recently died. One of the reasons for that, he was not allowed to leave Gaza to seek cancer treatment. And that is not an isolated example. I mean, for God's sakes, how would you feel, again, if your family or friends or your community was being constantly bombed and surveilled, and they weren't letting you in or out? They were restricting your travel, restricting your food, your electricity, your water. Okay? Like, think about that. Think about those conditions that creates. Think about just the just the psyche that somebody would develop being in those really horrible and deplorable conditions. You would want to fight back and resist in whatever way you could, and that's what the Palestinian people are doing with the resources that they have. So again, there's no both sidesing this. You either stand up and speak out against oppression, or you stand with the oppressors. As Howard Zinn said, he wrote the Untold People's History of the United States. I need to read the book, the An Indigenous People's History of the United States. I believe that's by Roxanne Dunn Ortiz, something like that. But anyways, Howard Zinn said, R.I.P. You can't be neutral on a moving train. And so yeah, if there's different events in your area, there was quite a few over the weekend here in the Pacific Northwest and around the country and around the world, and more and more people are in solidarity with the Palestinian people and their liberation struggle. But again, like I mentioned earlier, it even if a vast majority of the world weren't, public, government, otherwise, weren't supporting of this, of the Palestinian struggle for freedom, it who Palestinians could care less, I would think. Why would they need the approval of Cornel West or me or you or Bernie Sanders or whoever, right? We're not the ones subjected to those. We're not living in that open air concentration camp in Gaza. We're not the one being, tortured by the IDF and the Israeli forces, right? They're going through that shit on a daily basis. That's been their lived reality for 75 fucking years. Okay? So they don't need our approval, but if there are ways to support them, particularly, I think, financially supporting different organizations on the ground, different humanitarian groups providing aid. Um, Definitely, I need to do some research on my own. Let me know if you know of any good groups to support that are kind of part of this cause. Peace, much love, all power to the people, and all power to the Palestinian resistance as they stand up and fight, as they continue their fight. Again, this has been going on for 75 years since the initially were ethnically cleansed from Palestine, right? That's Palestine, Palestinians, as they continue their freedom struggle. And again, they have every right to resist by every means necessary. And if any one of us was in a similar position, we would be fighting back with whatever means that we had, and it wouldn't matter what the outside world thought. We're the ones living in those conditions. So peace, much love. I could figure out how to end this.